And I should introduce Javi Morim at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center and the University of Memphis Law alum. She'll introduce our first speaker.
Thank you very kindly. I imagine you can probably hear me fine without the mic. Okay. James Jones is one of the most formidable intellects I know, and also a very nice guy, as you will see soon. His contributions to the literature on this are also astonishing. He is, as mentioned, the author of Bad Blood, the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. It is the definitive history of Tuskegee. It really is. The others pale by comparison. New York Times called it back in '81 when it came out one of the 6 best nonfiction books published that year. American Public Health Association gave its annual Arthur Vistelier. Thank you. I don't have my glasses on. That wasn't bad. Okay, given annually for the best book in public health. And Art Kaplan. Artie is one of the guys who, anytime a news person says, you know, needs to find somebody to talk about bioethics, they go get Art. So Artie says, and he means it, and Art has great stature in bioethics, the most important book in the history of the field. This is a photo from 1997 when President Clinton issued an apology on behalf of the nation to the survivors and the families of non-survivors of the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. And this is Jim, who of course was there. We also have Jim as the author of Alfred Kinsey and Public-Private Life, and this was no small tome, upwards of 600 pages, and that year it was runner-up for the Pulitzer Prize. Katharine Graham's autobiography edged it out just barely. He's also the author, Jim, is 7th edition correct? The predominant book on American history in use in colleges all over the United States of America. He is one of a small handful of co-authors. He has authored numerous articles, including feature articles in the New Yorker, and appeared all over the place, including Good Morning America, Today Show, CNN, NPR, now we get to my favorites, Talk of the Nation, and All Things Considered. He is an academician. He's been on the faculty of the University of Houston for 17 years as a distinguished professor. And before that, actually after that, okay, to University of Arkansas as the Alumni Distinguished Professor, which is their oldest endowed professorship at that university, and currently working on a number of projects, including, how many of you remember David Vedder, the Bubble Boy, who had, some really interesting stuff on that. We'll bring him back. So, and now, the important part, fishing. Okay, this is our guest. He didn't know I was going to do this. That is one serious darn fish. A rainbow trout, yes, and that is the one honking fish. All right, Jim, join us, please. We're going to send some video, send some screen. Yay! Heck, you guys! Woohoo!
We got a little bit of a gift for you.
Oh, how wonderful.
Law school. So you can hang that in an appropriate place in your fishing cabinet.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's lovely, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm sort of tempted to hear from the fish. I mean, get his story. I'm part of the program that's going to be the bad part. I guess the happy part is this afternoon, or the better part. My story is unrelentingly grim, so I'll truth in lending at the beginning. I came across material. Oh, hold on, I'm forgetting my manners. Thank you very much, Amy, for inviting me here. I'm delighted to be at the University of Memphis. I love river towns. This is a great one, so thanks for having me. I came across material on the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment in 1970. That was 2 years before Gene Heller of the Associated Press broke the story. I was working in the National Archives. I was a graduate student finishing my doctorate at Indiana University. I was working on the social hygiene movement, the effort of reformers to do something about syphilis and prostitution. And I was working in Record Group 90, which houses the records of the United States Public Health Service's Division of Venereal Diseases. And that record group has 423 letter boxes. They're all stuffed to the gills. And dutiful graduate student that I was, I slogged through them. I was going to find what was there. Everything in that record group spoke either to the prophylaxis of syphilis or the treatment of syphilis, except 4 letter boxes that were on this untreated syphilis clinic in Macon County, Alabama. And I remember sticking my nose in those boxes and actually pulling off my other topic, my real research at the time, and spending a couple of hours reading with my mouth falling further and further open, the story, or the beginning of the story of Tuskegee. But, dutiful graduate student that I was, I went back to my project and started taking notes on it. I had no idea that the experiment was still going on. I have very little to say in self-defense, except that I was, after all, in an archive. And in the archive, you're supposed to be involved with the mort main of the past, and you don't think about those events being contemporary. I also saw in those record groups and other record groups other examples of non-therapeutic human experimentation. So while I was shocked about Tuskegee, it did not hit me in a vacuum. I'd seen other stuff that was also awful, though not as awful. So what I did was to just make a note to myself when I do archival research, and I love archival research. I love to suck dust. I love to be, in the archives and open boxes that no one else has seen. I'm a hunter, and I call it, not smelling anybody else's piss on the trail. Everything's pristine. You're the first guy in it. So, I love doing that, and when I see something that I think is an important topic, either for me or for my students, I make a note card on it, and I put it in my pocket, and I take it home. Well, I made a note card on Tuskegee, and it sat in my pocket for 2 years. All right. I went, after finishing my doctorate, to an exciting new program that they just started at Harvard, the Interfaculty Program in Bioethics. And they had lawyers, they had anthropologists, they had people in literature, they had a token historian. Our class of people that year, I think, was a remarkable group. George Annis was in it. Cicely Bach, the president of Harvard's wife, was one of the fellows. A group of us who actually went on and wrote some books in the field and tried to bring the humanities to those kinds of issues in medicine. So I went to the directors of the program and I said, I know you gave me a fellowship to do this, but I want to do that. And they, it became very clear that they didn't care what I did as long as I got out of their office. And that was a very good lesson to me, because I learned the relationship between chaired professors and postdocs was roughly that between a dog and a fire hydrant. So all I had to do was keep out of their way. I called a friend of mine as soon as Gene Heller broke the story in the Associated Press. I called a friend of mine who was the Deputy Archivist of the United States, a great man, Albert Leisinger, Jr. And I called Al and I said, look, I've just seen the stories in the press. I want to come and get those records, because I saw the story that the Justice Department has asked you to find those records, to surrender them to the Justice Department, and to sequester the materials so that they can do their in-house investigation. And I don't trust this Justice Department. It's Richard Milhouse Nixon's. And I said, if those guys get the records, they're going to deep six them. And no one will find out ever what happened in Tuskegee. And he agreed, but he said, I'm under this directive, and what am I supposed to do? I said, come on, Al. I do my best. Come on, Al. Help me, buddy. A couple of hours later, he calls back and says, come, everything's set up. The records are no longer with us. We can't find them. They've been moved from the National Archives to Suitland, Maryland. And in Suitland, Maryland, it's a cavernous, huge building, and nobody can find this stuff. The cataloging system seems to have broken down. We've been looking for them for 4 days. So he said, but all those guys out there are sort of my guys. They're my pups. I trained them. And I've been on the phone, and the fix is in. You're going to go there. They're going to shoot you under the radar. They're going to let you actually go back in the stacks, which they never do for anybody. I'm getting unbelievable help from this man. And he said, and if you find the stuff, He said, we're going to put a stamp on each document that you copy. He said, we'll copy them for you for free, by the way, which helped a lot because there were thousands of them when I finally found them. He said, we'll put a stamp, we'll put the letterbox, we'll put the folder number, and those will be admissible in a court of law as authentic records. That will authenticate them. And if the Justice Department happens to lose those records, you'll have a shadow set of records, and those can be helpful to somebody besides you maybe down the line. So I went. It took a couple of weeks to figure out the pattern. I finally was able to reconstruct how the shipwreck happened, and I found the records, and they put the stamp on them, and that was the beginning of my research. When I went to work on Tuskegee, I really thought it was going to be a simple morality play. I had an image of physicians with kind of blood dripping from fangs, and all I had to do was be the pilgrim who would take people through the secret of truth and show people the story, and then we'd all learn how awful things were. Things were awful, but they were awful in a much more complicated human way than I possibly could have understood. To understand Tuskegee, I thought what I needed to do was look at the broader issue of race and medicine. I wanted to find out, historically, how physicians had viewed disease in African Americans and what difference race made. What kind of a prism was it? When they looked at an African American person, how was their perception changed, altered, when they looked at disease? Was race a powerful prism? Did it distort? Was it clear? I wanted to find out. At that point, we knew a lot, about African Americans losing the vote. We knew a lot about slavery. We knew about a number of topics. I've always said that race in this country, I think, has attracted the best historians because it's the crucible of American history. And it's a story that if you look at Pulitzer Prizes in history, there have been more given on books and race than any other topic. It's just the best people tend to work on it because it's hard and it's tragic. So with Tuskegee, I thought what I would do is look at historically how white physicians had viewed disease in black patients. And I narrowed that search to looking at syphilis. But I thought syphilis was a really good choice because syphilis plunges people into perceptions about black sexuality. And one of the bedrock features of racism in our country has been how white people have looked at African Americans and seen, it's kind of, they project their fantasies, they project their worst instincts. They see in African Americans historically people who can't control their libidos, who are, hopelessly not in charge of their lives because of sex drives that no one can control. So anyway, I looked at syphilis, and I looked at all the medical journals I could find, regional, state, national, and I looked at them over for more than a century. I was in a great place. I had access to the Widener Library. I had access to the National Library of Medicine. It took a while, but I got that literature under control. And let's see. Yeah, I'll come to him in a minute. What comes out of that literature is what I described a moment ago. Chapter 2 in Bad Blood is called A Notoriously Syphilis-Soaked Race. That's a direct quote from a medical article from the 1890s. That literature is cut from the same cloth. It all talks about syphilis in African Americans being a horrible problem. The thrust of what the literature says is that syphilis is ubiquitous. 95% is the figure you see again and again of all black people are syphilitic. And they can't, there's no point in treating them because if you treat them, they simply go out and reinfect themselves because they're too stupid to come in for treatment and they have, sex drives they can't control. So what we have here is an insoluble problem, but also some of them come out right out and say it. We also have a solution to the racial problem because these people are going to die because we can't help them. So what they do is create a rationale for inactivity, in the face of a disease which by their own estimates is, epidemic and endemic. So, I said, now I've got it. I was right, blood dripping from fangs, simple morality play. Nah. The Progressive Era is a remarkable period in American history. It's 1820 roughly, 1890 roughly to 1920. And at that point, America has gone through seismic changes. Industrialization, urbanization, immigration, okay, has transformed Jefferson's America into a very different country. Big cities, agricultural segment, not as important, urbanization, diverse ethnicity. Reformers, beginning in the 1890s, took a look, okay, at this furious process of nation change. And they began to take some kind of toll on the consequences of that rapid change and what America was becoming. And they tried to reform stuff. And one of the areas that they reform in is public health. And the public health service, which is largely moribund until this point, begins to get traction. The public health service organizes itself around diseases. There's a TB section. There's every division has a disease it functions on, and all the divisions have people who will tell you that what they work on is the most important thing in the world. Nothing else matters. They're true believers. That was true also of the VD division. This man, Tolliver Clark, was the director of the Division of Venereal Diseases of the Public Health Service. And he thought that syphilis in African Americans was the most important public health issue facing the nation. What he wanted was to do something about it. Rather than saying, we can't help, these people are beyond the pale, he thought that if you applied medicine, that you could do something about the problem. What he needed was money to do it. Well, the Progressive Era is also remarkable for the outpouring of funds through philanthropy to begin to address a number of social problems. I think immediately of the Rockefeller Foundation. I can't write the history of the 20th century, okay, as I understand it, without understanding the Rockefeller Foundation's role. The medical division of the Rockefeller Foundation is sensational. If you want to know where that long line of Nobel Prize winners starts, it starts with the medical division of the Rockefeller Foundation, which went into medical schools, gave grants, decided to water green spots. That man's a scientist, that person is not. You get the money, you don't. The people who get the money go on, develop huge centers. They change science in America. Another foundation that does great work is the Rosenwald Fund. And the Rosenwald Fund is Sears and Roebuck money, okay? And they are primarily into African American education. They build Rosenwald Fund schools throughout the Jim Crow South. Separate but equal was always a nasty joke. Separate they were, equal they were not. Most or many African American communities didn't have schools. And what the Rosenwald Fund tried to do was to go into those areas and build schools so that black children could get an education. Clark wanted to get money to do public health work. And by a happy coincidence, at the time he needs it, the Rosenwald Fund added a division of health, a health program. They got a guy named Michael M. Davis to direct it. Davis was the head of the dispensary movement in Boston and was a shaker and a mover in the field of public health, but he knew nothing about African American health problems. So what happens is that the two of them hook up. Tolliver Clark is sort of seconded to the Rosenwald Fund to advise Julius Rosenwald and Michael M. Davis about black health issues. They want to do something. Rosenwald says, what's the most important problem? Tolliver Clark says, syphilis. Let's go get them. So they organize 6 different syphilis control demonstrations in 6 different southern states. Those communities are chosen because they represent demographic profiles that are different. At one end of the continuum is Albemarle County in Virginia. Okay, Albemarle County, home of the University of Virginia, has a wonderful public clinic. They go into that community, they throw out a Wasserman dragnet, they get incidence figures, and they determine that 5% of the African American population that they test has syphilis. At the other end of the continuum is Macon County, Alabama. They go into Macon County, Alabama, they test just an aggregate group of African Americans because they want to get incidence figures, and they discover that 35%, a whopping infection rate, has syphilis. They also discovered, though, through clinical measures, that 62% of that 35% has congenital syphilis. So the disease has largely lost its venereal quality and has become one of many epidemic, endemic diseases in the community. So what they do is they go into these communities, they apply the modern techniques of epidemiology, they give the people arsvetamin, neo-arsvetamin, mercury bionunction, the treatments of choice. They keep them under treatment. It takes a long time, 8 months, as many as 16 months, to get a negative serology. But they get those negative serologies, and they prove that African Americans will come in for treatment, that they're not beyond the pale of modern medicine, that all you got to do is throw some resources at them and some goodwill. So they do that, and all of this is taking place circa 1929, 30, 31. No sooner has this begun than the stock market crashes. The Rosenwald Fund, which has most of its money in Sears and Roebuck stock, gets caught short, and they have to cut back on new initiatives. And so they decide, as promising as this good treatment program was, that they've got to jettison it. And Tolliver Clark is saying, oh my God, we've just gotten started. So he wants to salvage something from a very promising public health initiative. I mean, I wish I could talk more about the Rosenwald Fund, because those 6 different states, they all generated medical articles, they all stirred the pot, they all got people optimistic about you could help people with black health issues, or black people with health issues. Clark decides to go back to Macon County and study the effects of untreated syphilis. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? If you know the history of syphilis, you sort of know the history of medicine. It's one of the most beautifully documented diseases in the world. Earlier people, before the germ theory of disease, they couldn't tell you, about spirochetes, but they could describe with eloquence the clinical progress of that illness. Their descriptions are lovely. So it was well documented. But physicians, scientists love the natural history of any disease. They want to see what happens if nature, is not interfered with. They want to document natural progression because they think it's a school in medicine. It teaches them a lot. There had been a study on Caucasians, a study of untreated syphilis on Caucasians in the 1890s and early 20th century in Oslo, the Oslo study. Once Salvarson, the new magic bullet, was discovered by Paul Ehrlich, they treated the patients. They gave them Salvarson. Until then, they were studying natural history in Oslo. But once treatment came along, they gave it to them, and I want to emphasize that. But you had a white study of untreated syphilis, and what they wanted was a black counterpoint to the white study. Why? Because they believed that race made a critical difference in the progress or the natural history of the disease. Specifically, they thought that in white people, the disease was more likely to attack the neural system, and in African Americans, more likely to attack the cardiovascular system. That's a fascinating idea. Where did it come from? I love to dig around and see if I can find stuff. There was a guy in Virginia, a physician named Taylor, who published an article in 1874, just as the germ theory disease is starting to, try to get hold. And in this disease, he says that syphilis in black people attacks the cardiovascular system, and you're going to love this. It's the most wonderful example of crude reductionism I can imagine, because they have big hearts. They're these big field hands, they have big strapping bodies, they have these powerful chests and big hearts, and it's a bigger target. So that idea, silly as it sounds, gained traction. And you begin to see it cited in other articles, then you begin to see it cited in medical textbooks. It acquires some hoary age, and nobody questions it. It's just out there, and it's got legs, and that's where it is. White people, though, they go on to say, it's more likely to attack the neural system. Why? Because white people have big brains. Think philology, big brains. So Clark wants to find out what happens with black people to play it off against the Oslo study. He also, though, and this is the irony of Tuskegee, he knows that it's a killer. He knows that it's a very serious disease. Many white doctors, though, argue that it's not. They say it's a trifling infection. They've had it so long, it doesn't really do that much damage. We don't need to get, up in arms about it. We can be blasé. Clark knew better. He wanted to document the really disastrous consequences of tertiary syphilis when it begins to attack the neural system, begins to attack organs of various kinds, because he wanted to galvanize the states to appropriate some money for black health. And the only way he thought he could do that would be to scare the bejesus out of them by showing how awful the disease was. So Clark goes back to Macon County, and he says, we have to get a conspiracy going. He doesn't use that word, but that's what it is. We have to find out how to get this thing going. So he makes an overture, first of all, to the Tuskegee Institute. He talks with Robert Russo-Moton, who is Booker T. Washington's successor as the principal of the Institute. He explains to him and explains to Eugene Dibble, who's the head of the Andrew Hospital there, that they want to come in and they want to study untreated syphilis. It's going to be an important study, but it's only going to last 6 months, a year max. Then they're out of there. The people at Tuskegee are, frankly, very honored to be asked by the Public Health Service to be partners in a study that the Public Health Service tells them is extremely important. So they're willing to go along. There's no deception there, okay? The Tuskegee Institute is told, okay, what the study is about. They need somebody to be a liaison, okay, with the, actually I'm going to go quickly here. These photographs, very quickly, are just taken in 1932. They're authentic in Macon County. They show you shotgun shacks, emaciated guys who are, it's hard to tell who's thinner, the man or the mule. These are sharecroppers who are living in a subsistence economy. They don't make money. They just make enough to, to live, barely. Okay. O.C. Winger is one of the two doctors that goes down to Macon County in 1932. He's accompanied by Raymond Bondelier. Okay, they put the study together, and they lie to the people in the community. They lie to the men. They say this is a continuation of the Rosenwald Fund demonstrations for syphilis, or for bad blood, they call it. We're here to treat you. We're here to do you good. All right, and they trade upon the goodwill that that first therapeutic program had created in the community. They get all the doctors together in Macon County, the medical societies, in Macon County, Tallapoosa County, Russell County, Bullock County, all the contiguous areas. They get them together and they say, we're going to give you a list of people. And these are people who are going to be in our study. And if they come in your office asking for treatment for syphilis, don't treat them. Okay, because we're going to study them and we don't want the study messed up with treatment. So they create a conspiracy that hermetically seals these men, locks them in, and cuts off all avenues of care. That's important. What they also do is touch base with the state health department. They never go anywhere. The Public Health Service doesn't go anywhere without touching base with state health authorities because they don't want to be accused of socialized medicine. They don't want to step on toes. And Dr. Baker, who's the state health officer, actually throws them a curve. When they ask him for permission to come in and do the study, Baker says, nah, not the way you're describing it, not on my watch. I'm a health guy. I got to worry about communicable diseases. I have to worry about contagion. And I want you to give those men some treatment. You can't just come in here and study them. So Clark is really royally pissed off by that. He doesn't want to do it. It's expensive, but he also understands that he can't do the study unless he does it. So he agrees to give the men a little treatment. All the men in the Tuskegee experiment get a few shots of neo-arsphetamin. They get a few rubs of mercury bi-unction, and not enough to cure them. The hope is enough to render them non-contagious if they should flare up again. Not enough to cure them, but enough to make the experiment contaminated. One little bit of treatment in a study that's supposed to be untreated, is contamination. So the experiment, from the beginning, is bankrupt scientifically. It is bogus. It is not as advertised. Over the next 40 years, there'll be more than a dozen scientific papers published in great medical journals on the experiment. They'll all have, this is a study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. Bullshit. Okay, it's all undertreated syphilis. The study has no scientific validity. All right, they have to get things together. They get their team together. They lie to the men. They get Nurse Rivers to be the liaison. She is the person who keeps the people in the experiment. Okay, she vouches for them. They trust her. She is, depending on how you look at her, a Judas goat, okay, or a person of more complexity. This is just a letter they send out, last chance for special treatment. Again, they're lying to the men, telling them they're going to keep them. So what happens? They put the study together in 1932. In 1933, they added refinement. Another guy comes back to Macon County after O.C. Winger and Raymond von der Leer, a guy named John R. Heller. And he puts together a control group. The first group has roughly 400 men in it. They are the syphilitics. The control group has 200 people. They're non-syphilitics. And they want to compare the two groups to see how they're doing. Tolliver Clark wants to end the study. The guy had started it because he doesn't have any money. And after 6 or 8 months, he pulls Raymond von der Leer and he pulls O.C. Winger out of the field and said, that's it. We've got everything we're ever going to know. You're done. They're furious because they see in their clinical examinations what they think is a chapter titled here, a perfect gold mine of cardiovascular syphilis. And they want to keep the study going because they want to learn more. It doesn't make sense to them to end something after a few months when they can learn a lot more if they keep it going. So what happens is that Tolliver Clark, the guy who originated the study, retires. And guess who takes over? It's Raymond von der Leer, the guy who's mesmerized by the pathology, the guy writing these rapturous letters about cardiovascular syphilis. Once Raymond von der Leer is at the helm, once he's the new director of the division, the life of the Tuskegee study is extended. It's now open-ended because he has no intention of ending it. He wants to keep it going. This is important because it anticipates what happens. People ask me, how does the experiment go on for 40 years? The answer, a large part of the answer, is that the Public Health Service promotes from within. And people who were young Public Health Service officers cut their teeth on Tuskegee. They'll be sent there year after year as young past assistant surgeons. They'll study the men. Later, they'll be promoted. They'll become division chiefs. They'll open that filing drawer cabinet. They'll see this folder on Tuskegee, which they authored, be one of the co-authors when they were young guys, and say, oh, yeah, Tuskegee, I remember that. Geez, that's a great study. That's a great study. No reason to end it. Tuskegee is self-perpetuating because it's never tested by new eyes. No one casts new vision at it. No one throws a fresh perspective in that direction. They're all hostages of the fact that they worked on Tuskegee as young people. They grow up with Tuskegee as professionals, okay, and they are enamored of Tuskegee and want to keep it going. It's their pet project. There's no other project like it in the Public Health Service that has so many alumni who are so devoted to it, okay? So Tuskegee becomes self-perpetuating. I like to think of Tuskegee kind of metaphorically as a sick farm, a place where sick people are kept. And I like to think of the Public Health Service as absentee owners who come in once a year, and this is their term, not my term, and conduct, quote, annual roundups. They bring the men in, they examine them, and they see how the disease is progressing. Then they go away, and the next year they come back and they do it again. Doesn't cost much, cheap experiment to run. It becomes self-perpetuating. A classic example of inertia. Something in motion, staying in motion because no outside body has interfered with it. Okay, I like to envision a different outcome for Tuskegee. It's what I just said could really anticipate the whole 40 years of the experiment. That's what keeps it going. Scientific curiosity. They think they're going to answer the Oslo study. They're going to demonstrate that syphilis is bad, maybe get some money for treatment. All those things come together. But there were chances for them to rethink what they were doing. In 1938, there was a new Surgeon General, Thomas Perrin of the United States. And Perrin is an old syphilis man. He writes a book, Shadow Over the Land, and it's a clarion call for the nation to treat syphilis nationally. The Public Health Service returns to the South in 1937 and 38. They have mobile clinics. This program is modeled completely after the Rosenwald Fund demonstrations of going out into the hinterland and treating syphilis in rural populations. In 1938, that syphilis treatment program, conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service at public expense, catches up with Macon County. They roll in, the trucks roll in. And people line up, and they have serology tests, and the people who need care get care, except Nurse Rivers will go with those trucks. And when people are lining up, she'll say, don't treat that person, don't treat this guy, don't treat that man. They're in the Tuskegee study. All right, this changes things for me in my mind. You could argue that until 1938, the Tuskegee experiment, while awful, didn't make any difference. Race, ignorance, poverty had all decreed that the people in Tuskegee were not going to get treatment. They could not afford treatment. They couldn't afford medicine on a fee-for-service basis. Most of those people went from cradle to grave without seeing a physician, absent the Public Health Service. All right. In 1938, that changes. They would have been given treatment, and they are actively denied treatment. And that, to me, is the different moral magnitude, of the issue. The next opportunity to kind of rethink it comes in World War II. About a third of the men are young enough to be inducted into the armed services, but they're not, because the Public Health Service sends to the local draft boards in each of those communities a list of people on the Tuskegee study roster. And they say, do not please draft these people, because if you draft them as part of the induction process, they're going to get tested and they're going to get treated, and that's going to destroy our study. So don't draft them, give them deferments, because they are, in point of fact, soldiers of science. They are serving the country now as soldiers of science. Don't draft them. And so they don't. That's the second time some of the men would have been helped, and they weren't. In 1943, Alabama passes the Henderson Act. It is a model public health act requiring treatment at state expense for medically indigent patients, treatment for anybody that's got a communicable disease. Once again, a great opportunity, nothing happens. They don't apply it to the men in the Tuskegee study. Next thing, penicillin. The drugs that I described earlier, arspetamine, neo-arspetamine, mercury by inunction, toxic drugs, hard to administer, efficacious, yes, but burdensome. It took a really good clinician to handle the toxicity, to match the dosage to the person, and it took a long time, and it was expensive. Not so penicillin. Penicillin is the magic bullet, It kills spirochetes, and that's the short and the long of it. In the war, it's kind of a scarce, supply, because the troops have first shot at the wonder drug, but very soon after the war, it's in abundant supply and could have been given to the men. No penicillin. Now, that doesn't surprise me, because I think if you withhold whatever is the treatment of choice, you're going to withhold the next treatment of choice, because the past doesn't know the future. All you do in the past is, deal with the best you have, and when they withheld the first regimen of drugs, they were withholding the best they had. And I don't think the fact that they got better drugs created any kind of moral dilemma for them, because they'd already crossed the bridge. They crossed the Rubicon. So, no penicillin. I asked John R. Heller, let me see if I can find him, because these are Nurse Rivers with the men, going out in the field, getting the guys, taking a blood test, venipunctures for serology tests. Nurse Rivers giving out pink medicine, the iron tonic and aspirin to the men. That's what they thought they were getting for treatment. All these, I want to get to somebody. These are, oh, we should pause here. The spinal taps are pretty awful. They had to lie to the men. They told them that they were not going to be hurt or anything. There's no local anesthesia. Many of the men developed crushing headaches. They sealed them off so they couldn't tell each other what was going to happen behind. They called it Dr. Vondelier's golden needle treatment, 20-gauge needles. This is ulcerated cutaneous syphilis. I thought we ought to maybe see a little bit of what we were talking about, just quickly. This shows that it's never sub rosa, it's never surreptitious. There are articles published in great medical journals. Everybody inside medicine in the field knows about it. This is the guy I want, John R. Heller. Heller is the guy who put together the control team in 1932. By 1943, he replaces Vandelier as the director of the division, illustrating my point about promotion from within, okay? He's in charge. And when I interviewed Rod Heller, John R., the R stands for Roderick, and people call him Rod. When I interviewed Dr. Rod Heller, I asked him about penicillin. I said, did you guys ever talk about penicillin? And he said, no. I said, well, at the risk of belaboring the obvious, why not? He said, it would have ended the experiment. Okay, I get it. You know, no ethical issue here. Also, people sometimes think that, okay, the guys in Tuskegee, the docs, regrettable, but they're not major players. They're not big guys in the field. That's not right. John R. Heller, in 1948, will become the first director of the National Cancer Institute. Okay, in 1965, he'll become the director of Sloan Kettering. Okay, he is a first magnitude medicos, a powerful, accomplished person with a huge ethical blind spot about Tuskegee. Okay, the next thing, no penicillin. What about Nuremberg? What about Nuremberg? We've got the Nazi experiments, we've got the Nuremberg Code, we have an opportunity to rethink what we're doing in Tuskegee. John Heller is still head of the division in 46, 47, when those codes are articulated. I asked Dr. Heller about Nuremberg. Did you guys ever discuss Tuskegee in the light of Nuremberg? And he says, no. And I said, well, were you troubled by the fact that, then he says, wait a second. You can see a light bulb go off over his head. Wait a second. Are you saying that we were Nazis? No, Dr. Heller, I do my best crawfish. No, I'm not saying that, sir. I'm a kid then. Wait a minute. Are you calling us Nazis? Are you calling us Nazis? No, Dr. Heller, I just wanted to know if you discussed. He said, I don't really like the direction that this interview is going in. He was very, very uncomfortable with that question. But no, they never discussed Nuremberg and never applied it. The next thing, and this takes us up to more modern times, I think the next opportunity to rethink Tuskegee was the civil rights movement. Montgomery, and we're going to hear a lot about the man who knows more than anybody on the planet about the civil rights movement. Montgomery's 40 miles up the road. It's the epicenter, okay, at the beginning of the civil rights movement. History is being made there. And a new sensibility is taking shape because African Americans are taking to the streets and demanding equal rights. And that produces a sea change, okay, and a shift really in attitudes toward Jim Crow and toward the whole second-class citizenship to which black people had been reduced after the Civil War. And, there's a chance to say, Tuskegee doesn't pass the nose test. Things are happening that are going to put it in a very bad light. Maybe we ought to rethink this. And in point of fact, it does produce a change of sensibility, but not the way that I would like to have seen it go. Doctors write back and forth to each other with letters, and they say, well, maybe now is not a really good time to publish this article. The climate's kind of shifted a little bit on us. The ground's, moving beneath our feet. Let's wait a little bit when things aren't quite as sensitive. Then we can publish. Okay. So, yeah, there's an idea, but again, they don't act upon it. Nothing changes until we get to, just a second, Okay, nothing changes until we get, I'm going to go back to this man, Peter Buxton. Peter Buxton is the whistleblower. He works in the Hunt Street Clinic out in San Francisco. He does epidemiological follow-up work. He has to do a paper for a graduate course, and somebody tells him about something called Tuskegee. So he gets the published articles, there are about a dozen of them, and he reads about them, and well, Diogenes could have stopped here. He's found his honest man. Peter is appalled. And he goes to his boss and he complains and says, you know, this isn't right. And the boss says, come on, you don't know what you're talking about. So he goes to his boss's boss and he says, this isn't right. This is morally wrong. And his boss says, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, Peter is indefatigable. Peter doesn't give up. So he writes these impassioned letters, which I found in the archives, to the head of CDC, you know, saying this is really, really bad stuff. And after 2 years of being an inside agitator, they finally fly him at government expense to Atlanta. They put him in a big room. Attorney Gray and I were in that room later deposing, when Fred was deposing David Sensor, the head of CDC. Long table, all these flags, very impressive venue. And gathered there are about a dozen public health service officers who have worked on the Tuskegee study, and boy, do they want to get at this troublemaker. They spend 2 hours just beating the socks off him. You're not a physician. You don't divine the mysteries of science. You don't know what you're talking about. You're a social worker, and we know you mean well, but shut up. Okay, that's the gist of it. So Peter, you know, kind of limps home. He's badly bruised and chewed on. But in a couple of weeks, Peter being Peter, ego rallies. And he writes another letter back to CDC, and this letter is different. This one is no longer appealing to moral notions of right and wrong. In this one, he says, I don't know if I'm right about this, but it does seem to me that you have put in place a conspiracy that has cost people their lives. You've withheld treatment for disease we could have treated them for. We already know that their life expectancy has been shortened. We know from autopsies that many of these people died directly from syphilis. You kept the local doctors from treating them. You've really created a conspiracy that, you know, resulted in loss of life. I don't know if a jury would talk murder one. He said, but they might talk murder two. And that got their attention. That got their attention. So what they do is in 1969, they convene an internal review of Tuskegee, the first time it's really discussed ethically. In Atlanta, they get together. It's a scene from Casablanca. They round up the usual suspects. All the guys who've worked on the experiment are there, but they bring in one ringer. And the ringer is this man, Dr. Stallerman, who is a very distinguished cephalogist at the University of, or at Vanderbilt Medical School. Long bald hitter in the field. Okay, they talk about Tuskegee, they lay it all out, and there's only one guy in the room who raises his hand and says, I'm not on board, and that's Stallerman. And he's the only only person who hasn't worked on the experiment, the only person who isn't co-opted by familiarity. Stallerman says that he thinks it's an ethical problem. He thinks they ought to treat the men and end the experiment, but he is, in the end, shouted down. So what they try to do, what comes out of this ethical review, and by the way, no ethicist is on that committee, no one from the humanities, no lawyer, no person of color. It's the old guys deciding, okay, that we look at ourselves in the mirror and we see good people. So Stallerman tries to drag them into reality. It doesn't work. But what they decide to do is to try to really put more resources into Tuskegee, clean up the data, improve the science, and bring it out with a bang. Because as one of the people there put it, Sid Olansky put it, we owe it to the people who have died to continue the study. Okay. So the study goes on for another couple of years. Peter Buxton doesn't go away. Peter goes to law school. You guys know who Prouse is, or Prouse, the light of torts, Professor Proctor, yeah, thank you, yeah, I couldn't pull it up. He has Proctor, you know, is it Proctor?
Prosser.
Say it again.
Prosser?
Prosser, thank you. I got it right in my book. Okay, he has Prosser, and he tries to get Prosser, you know, this big guy in the field, excited. And Prosser says, "Harumph, young man, stirring up litigation? Why, the statute of limitations has long since run out on a crime if there is a crime." So no help there. Finally, Peter tells a woman named Edie Lederer, who is a reporter for the Associated Press. And she is the head of their Far Eastern division, and she's in San Francisco for some R&R, and they have a date, and they wind up back at Peter's house, and they have Chinese food, and they're eating it on the floor, and Peter tells her about it. She can't believe it. He goes to a file, he gets the articles, he shows her the articles, she believes it. So she calls her boss and says, "I have this story." And her boss says, "No, you don't. You're going back to the Far East. Gene Heller, our person on the beat in Washington, has the story." Gene Heller breaks the story in July 1972. 4 hard-hitting articles, exposés. The muckrakers would have been proud. I mean, she does a first-rate job of investigative reporting. Immediately, Tuskegee blows up. The Public Health Service, you know, tries for a brief period to temporize and to try to make excuses. Then very quickly they get it that the public ain't buying. So they start saying, "This is awful. We don't know how it happened. You know, who could have possibly been responsible?" So they kind of crawfish back and forth, not knowing what to do. But the public knows what to do. The heat gets turned up, okay, and the Tuskegee syphilis experiment ends. It ends because it was tested against perceptions of people who weren't hostage of what they started. The simple truth of the experiment, that people who were harmed, who could have been helped, is the overriding truth. And Tuskegee is ended. Now, ordinarily when I get to this point, I go to the next point, but I'm not going to go to the next point because the person who is the next point is with us. And Attorney Fred Gray will take things from here and we'll learn a lot. What I want to say in closing, though, is the legacy of Tuskegee. And that is that when faith is damaged, you know, it's hard to put it back together. The glue of faith is trust. You've got to look at a person and kind of have the, the understanding, the confidence inside yourself that that person is honest and they're here to do you good. And if you don't have that, something very precious is lost. Tuskegee for the African American community was a body blow. It was a very, very nasty body blow. It confirmed many bad suspicions that white people were doing what they'd done for more than 300 years, which was harming African Americans. And the absence of trust, didn't come in a vacuum. It begins with capture in Africa. You're in your village one day and somebody hits you with a club, and the next thing you're in shackles and you're on a slave boat. Then you're in the Middle Passage, the horrors of the Middle Passage, where a lot of people around you die before coming to the New World. And then in the New World, you're a slave, okay? And you're chattel property. And slavery lasts for, until the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, there's this promise of 40 acres and a mule. We're going to have redemption. We're going to have a place in the table, a place in the sun. 40 acres and a mule doesn't happen. It's replaced by sharecropping, subsistence wage sharecropping, peonage, okay, and the crop lien system, all right? So accompanying that economic servitude, where your slavery is replaced just by a subsistence wage and no mobility. Accompanying that is Jim Crow. And Jim Crow redefines, the horror of Jim Crow is that there's never an end to it. One law takes away this, one law takes away that, and there's never a floor. There's always a new way to insult you. There's always a new way to segregate the races, to tell them that you can't be here with a white person, you can't be there with a white person. It's schools, it's theaters, it's buses, okay? It's, how can we rub your nose, again, create a new scab in your degradation. Okay, it's Jim Crow. So when people come up to Tuskegee, they look at it through a racial prism of more than 300 years. And that racial prism does not allow for a lot of, gee, we're surprised this happened. It's cut from a cloth, that is very, very painful for these people. So when people ask me about Tuskegee and the erosion of confidence, and they say, well, in the 1990s, African Americans began to charge, really in the late 80s and the 90s, that HIV was a man-made disease created specifically for genocide directed at the African American community. A huge conspiracy theory. And when people ask me about that, I say, now think about it for a minute. Would you really do that? Would you really let loose this pathogen that can kill everybody? Come on, don't be paranoid. And they'll say, oh yeah, well, what about Tuskegee? Okay, so Tuskegee becomes the answer to rationality because it's so powerful it overrides rationality. They say, how could this have happened? Well, I'll tell you how it happened. It happened with Tuskegee. So a lot of work had to be done, and a lot of work still needs to be done in restoring the bond of faith so that when African Americans see a medical person, they get back to that notion of this person is here to do me good. And I think the only way that's going to happen is that you listen to the fears, you hear out all the concerns that people have, you try to address those as best you can, and you say, from here, we're going to do better. Thank you.
A few minutes for questions. If
Okay.
anybody has questions, we have a few minutes. Any questions for Dr. Jones?
Sir,
Right here.
Oh, yeah.
I can just imagine, growing up in the South, the reaction of many people. Were you threatened? If people come to you and say, darn you, you're doing terrible things, did you get negative responses from the public?
Not really. CDC had me come and give a lecture in the big auditorium to as many people as wanted to come. And then they put it in a seminar room with people from the Division of Venereal Diseases. And one of the guys in that room was standing up for his boss and just tore into me, saying, how could I have juxtaposed this guy from the 1960s with a guy from the 1930s? And he was just, he was hot under the collar and, just blowing off steam at me. No threats, no fist fights, no big deal. I gave a lecture once at UCal Berkeley that was a national meeting of IRBs, and the son, of one of the doctors that I had identified and written about, with historical description, I'll put it that way. Not flattering, but I can't change the truth. This person was drunk and was out of control and had to be removed because I think he and I might have, checked each other's shirt collars. But no. They bat, I keep score. And no threats of bodily harm, no bombs. Unlike my colleague, who was under physical danger for things that he did. No, I can't show you any battle scars. No.
I'd like to ask
Yes.
How much do you think that nurse who participated in the Tuskegee trial knew about the truth about the deceit with the
Louder, please. I'm hard.
I'm sorry, I was asking about the nurse who participated.
Nurse Rivers?
How much she knew about it?
Yeah, she knew everything. Yeah, she knew everything. The African Americans, one of the intriguing parts of this story is the element of biracial support. okay, in which the senior partners are unquestionably the white physicians, but the people who are complicit in the extent that they lent their cooperation, there is an African American contingent. And, the historiography on this in medicine has been developing over the last, 15 years. Bad Blood is now more than 30 years old. The book's been in print for, a long time. But I followed this literature that's looking at race in medicine with regard to inroads that black medicine makes in white medicine, essentially, because the medical profession is segregated. And for a very long time, hospitals are segregated. There's a new book called Deluxe Jim Crow, which is, I think, a really good way to think about it. Within the NAACP, there's a big debate about how to desegregate medicine. And the purest argument is that we have to have complete integration. The white doctors and the black doctors have to have equal staff privileges. They have to be able to see their patients. There has to be an open community within medicine. And the gradualists, the ones who are, I think, going to be closer to what can be accomplished, are the ones who say, well, no, the first thing let's work on is let's get a colored wing to the white hospital. Because that will be, the argument once the camel gets his nose under the tent, the rest of him follows. So if we can get in there, that will start the process and more good things will happen. And so they look at strategies for how you desegregate medicine. Always the issue is that medicine is white. The power structure is white. The people who want in are African Americans. They're black. And how you get in is the issue. With Tuskegee, the white power establishment is offering to bring in the Tuskegee Institute and to bring in the Andrew Hospital and cooperate together. Have a project that there's a place for African professionals to work with. And benefits come from that because black residents who weren't getting good residencies when they came out of Howard and then McNary are suddenly at Pennsylvania and at Johns Hopkins. There's a psephology community that the Public Health Service is plugged into, and they start getting better appointments. Okay, so there are benefits from cooperation. The people in Tuskegee are not making the decisions. Okay, they are not. I think there are large levels of responsibility and lesser levels of responsibility. And by any clear moral reckoning, the onus, the heavy burden, okay, of responsibility rests with the Public Health Service. But the element of biracial support can't be brushed out of history, because if it were, it would be, I think, to distort the facts and to not understand the complexity of Tuskegee and the very difficult circumstances under which African Americans in medicine had to operate. So.
Thank you. I think we're going to